Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. My name is Rotten Deadite. I'm in a really good mood today. Good things are happening. Also, it's Christmas, as you can see from my obligatory Christmas decoration of a stuffed long dog. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'm sorry. Today we're talking about Namira, and with me I brought some friends along, and they are people who have not been told what order to do this shit again. Thank you. All right, awesome. Okay, Chaos, go, everybody.
I'm James, also known as Aramithius.
Oh, okay, never mind. I'll go second then. I'm Felix, also known as Banu Hanamasashi, or now that guy in that Bow of the Fifth column video.
Yeah, he's internet famous now, chat. Yeah.
Michael, go.
I'll go. Okay. Hi, I'm Michael. You may know me from Reddit or other places as Scourgicus or Moon Sugar Leader. I'm the Khajiit guy.
And I'm Andrew, also known as the White Guar.
And I'm so glad that Michael is here with us today, because there's a lot of stuff about Namira that has to do with the Khajiit, and generally speaking, that's good news, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't know my ass from a hole in the ground when it comes to Namira. So, but what we're gonna do, but as usual, I'm gonna start with the broad picture. Namira is a Daedric prince whose realm or influence or inspiration tends to stray towards things that people find icky. For example, some of her nicknames are nicknames. It's a nice way to put it. Some of her titles are the Lady of Decay, the Spirit Daedra, and the Goddess of the Dark. Or one of my favorite, I think it's the who is it that calls her the Khajiit call her the Eldest Spirit, which sounds awesome. The Void. Somebody, I can't remember who, I think it's the Reachmen, call her the Black Fly, which is wonderful. That is a great title for a god.
I'm here to talk about the Reachmen and Namira.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, me too.
So, and now everybody's drinking. I had my last beer last night, so shit. I should have saved it for today, because now I have a reason to celebrate. So when we talk about things that people find icky, I'm talking about disease, not so much as as other Daedric princes, but infection and spiders, slugs, insects, other repulsive things. For example, you guys probably know her well in Skyrim as a god who's a Daedric prince associated with a cannibalism quest, which was which I still remember very clearly from that shocking moment when I saw NPCs I recognized sitting at that table, like eating people, and I went, I would have lost that bet.
In the reach.
Yeah. So that was really interesting. But anyway, very much a goddess, or excuse me, a Daedric prince of darkness and the hidden places and various spider-infested crawl spaces that I remember from my childhood. But the Khajiit, Michael, have a really interesting view on her as the Daedric prince and rightful ruler of all spirits. So can you talk a little more about that?
About spirits.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So who we really need here is Mac, because Mac is the expert on Namira, and I am not. And I did not really truly prepare as I should have.
You're still better prepared than I am.
Join the club, buddy. Join the club.
Yeah, let me.
It's the Selectives Lorecast. None of us know what the fuck we're talking about.
Hey.
No, Baka, you can't force Jung. You can't just say it in chat. It doesn't count.
Except for Felix, because he's internet famous now.
Yeah. Oh, that's for, yeah, right. Yeah. Felix knows everything about everything now.
Property.
Yes,
yeah, he does this properly now.
I'm sure someone is writing a video right now. It's like, Felix exposed, a takedown of Felix.
Hashtag cancel Felix.
Yeah.
So
anyway, spirits.
So there's. Let me start with this. And why can I? Okay. So for the Khajiit, there are two different views on Namira: pre-Redatan and the post-Redatan. Of course, Khajiit philosophy, theology, whatever you want to call it, is divided between the pre-Riddlethar Epiphany and the post-Riddlethar Epiphany.
Right.
Pre-Riddlethar Epiphany, which is the one favored by what's her name?
Amon-Dro.
Yeah, Amon-Dro is the author, but then
Okay.
who's the necromancer in Northern Elsewhere that you meet up with? Greatest quest in that whole zone.
Valkyrie?
Oh.
That's it, Vastri.
Or
She-
Valastari, something like that.
Something to that effect. Yeah, her. That the pre-Redatan view of Namira is really like she's bad news. Like she is almost like not, I wouldn't say necessarily a Satan figure in the sense of like a temptation, but maybe more like an Abaddon or a destroyer, if you will. Once the Riddlethar Epiphany shows up, their understanding of her changes, and she has almost a compassionate kind of. It's a lot much more compassionate view of Namira, because she's the one who ministers to the bent cats and helps them to unbend their tails. The post Redatan view is that that her realm is effectively purgatory. But here we go. I love this one. This is please don't do that. It did that. Go back. I love Amon-Dro because they're so evocative. So this is what Amon-Dro has to say about Namira, the eldest spirit, the great darkness. I'm gonna come back to that. The void. All creatures who feed on rotten flesh are her spies and the prey of cats. Cats being capitalized. The lunar lattice protects us from her hunger, but not our own. I could write books about that. Know that to name her is to invite the dark, capital D, so you must never do so, as Namira is the sound of her true name. She is a spirit of infinite realms, of which only Azura knows all. Mortals who become ensnared by this spirit are tortured until they forget who they were and know only Namira.
Well, she actually does that in ESO. They talk about how Namira, when you go to her realm, basically just destroys you over and over again until you lose all memory of who you actually were. Which, by the way, also feeds in really well with my whole theory of what happens to souls when they go into Aetherius. But whatever. Okay.
I got things to add.
Okay, hold on. So the last line is, this is eternal suffering for all souls, but the Jakajay, whom Azora will not abandon to the dark. And that's probably the line where, Ridthar Redata was like, okay, there is kind of a redemptive sense here. But yeah, she is bad news in the pre-Redatan pantheon.
And it's also present in several things. I mean, if we go with Anisi, Lorcage's heart is filled with the darkness, and from some bits from that passage, it almost felt to me like she has a presence in every Khajiit anyway. That you have got kind of the dark side as a as I don't know whether you'd say it as a literal aspect of Namira or part of Namira pulling the strings in someone's soul, but or maybe it's the other way, that Namira is the metaphorical, or is the manifestation of all the darkness within the soul, which also ties in really nicely with some of the Reachmen stuff, which we'll get to later.
Yeah.
Also, I would just like to add real quick, because I'm just so crazy about Redguards. I also would like to point out that if you want to look at an origin point for Namira, she is one of the oldest spirits in the Redguard pantheon, because at the end of the day, her realm is the realm of Satak eating himself over and over again until he bites at his own heart. So that's a cool little thing that a lot of people don't realize or think about in the Redguard
that
pantheon.
fits into that whole destroys you over and over again until you forget who you were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is part of Lorcan's madness.
Yeah,
and so,
although I would argue that's potentially Sithis as opposed to Namira. Do we need to make the difference between chaos and entropy and Sithis and the great darkness of Namira?
Because of the self-destructive aspect, as well as the self-cannibalization.
Right.
Well, I'm wondering if we can look at Namira. I mean, the same way that Lorcan is the soul of Sithis, Sithis is the soul of Padme. Could Namira be considered the soul of Lorcan?
That
Because,
might
I
be
mean,
Sheogorath, though, because he was born when
that's
Lorcan's
true.
Yeah,
divine
he's
spark
the
was
Sithis-shaped
removed.
hole. Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
okay. I
right,
mean,
Sithis-shaped hole.
that makes because at least in Words of Clan Mother Anisi, I mean we see that Namira comes from Lorcan, is
Well,
the
right.
darkness within the heart of Lorcaj.
Mhm.
So I mean that seems to paint some some strings. Think it's always Sun in Philadelphia where he's got all the strings and everything. That really puts Shoggoth and Namira kind of on the same
Theme, I
guess.
guess?
Yeah,
Sort of in the
I
same
mean,
tune. You know?
Yeah,
Yes, because there's the
'cause
beats that the tails weave to for the bent cats,
Yeah.
which
Well,
is Namira. Yeah.
Let me
And
just
Sheogorath
say
invented
this.
music.
I do think what we're trying to do is we're trying to find parallels in what is intrinsically poetic
Yeah.
speech, poetic language, which might be sort of self-defeating. It's like when people like to say, well, like Sheogorath is the soul of or is the Sithis-shaped hole in whatever. It's like, I mean, that's that's supposed to be a metaphor. Oh, but of course, this is Elder Scrolls, so it is also literal. So never mind then. Actually, this is a very good conversation.
Plus, my thought was with Sheogorath, there's a whole bunch of additional aspects. With Namira, I've realized there's not that much else to go on, so we need to extrapolate a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me go back a bit here. I have two other sources to look at. So, James, you had mentioned Words of Clay Mother on Nissi. So in that one, we say, it says, and Fatomé gave birth to Lorcaj, the last of her litter, in the great darkness. And the heart of Lorcaj was filled with the great darkness. And when he was born, the great darkness knew its name, and it was Namira. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but we'll come back to that. Then in the favored daughter of Fatomé, Azora's kind of doing her thing, and let's see here. And Azora tried to return to Fatomé Mother, but her tears had formed a great sea. Beyond it was a black gate that opened into a hungering dark. Lorcaj stood in the doorway. He was broken and bleeding, and there was a hole in his chest. Okay, we know what that's from. But the great darkness was still in his blood, and it filled the hole where his heart had been. The dark mass beat like a heart, and black blood spilled out onto the threshold. Azora heard each beat of the heart like the beating of a drum, and each drop of blood tapped to form a rhythm she felt in her tail. But Fatomé had taught Azora the names of all the spirits, so she recognized the great darkness for what it was, and she roared in time with the song Urdra Namira, etc., etc. And then Azora tore out the dark heart of Lorcaj, that's Namira, and all the darkness in him came with it, and she cast it beyond the sea.
Khajiit lore is so fucking cool.
Yeah,
it is, right?
It's
They do.
just,
Yeah,
because we've got. I mean, I immediately. I mean, with Lorcaj standing in the doorway, that speaks to me of entering the tower.
Mm-hmm.
And so that could be a different perspective of Lorcan attempting and failing Kim.
It speaks to me to the blocking of the Redguard on the way to the Lost Shores.
Yeah.
I mean,
and then we've also got the black blood, which could be Ebony.
Yep.
Although Ebony is usually attributed to the heart of Lorcan, it was the blood that spilled as the heart was sailing in the Resgate.
Right.
No. Obsidian is the light, or not Obsidian. Ebony is the it's the oxidized blood or crystallized blood of Lorcan, and the blood that dripped from the heart, that formed the Chim or the Kaimil Ada ball that fell atop White Gold Tower. That's why it's the red the red
Oh.
diamond, because that's blood from the heart. Ebony is, I think, like oxidized Lorcan blood.
Hmm. It's old blood, yes.
Old blood.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay.
I
Interesting.
understood that reference.
Yep. Beware the old blood.
And then the whole thing about Fatime and was it Fatime and like the sea. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's so much to work with in that.
Also, I got very big, like the way the gate was described also reminded me of well, it actually kind of reminded me of two separate things, and I don't think they're connected, but who knows, in Elder Scrolls they might be.
No.
One, I was kind of reminded of the teeth of the world that you see in Redguard. I also imagined the part of various monomyth examples where it said that Lorcan had his heart removed with more than hands, which can be interpreted to mean towers, swords, weapons. It's implied that his arm is ebony because he punched through and pulled out his heart, which is why it might actually be Trinimac. So, like, I was kind of getting some vibes of that as well. But to bring this back to Namira, who we should be talking about, the black blood and the darkness and what that represents, there's a lot of things that I do want to talk about with regards to decay and how it manifests in different ways. So, in terms of like the body, there's a lot of Daedra who seem to be very much tied to bodily processes and the components of the body as a physical sense. Like Lorcan's corpse are the moons. Namira is seen as like the goddess of death, of rot, of decay. We have various gods of destruction, rape, domination. There's all these really gross aspects, disease, periite, right? So there's all these different bits that are sort of like the bacteria that are important to the functioning of life and allowing for the renewal of things, but they're gross and no one really wants to talk about them or discuss them. And so in the sense of Namira and being the great darkness, it's because the only thing keeping death at bay is life. Like the second we die and like the blood is no longer running, our body's immune system has shut down, and then the bacteria, literally from the first second you die, start to eat away at what used to be you, your soul, your body, your bones. It all gets broken down and recycled into life. But we don't like that. And so we like to imagine that there's more beyond this darkness, that there is a heaven, a hell, some kind of afterlife, a soul, a purpose behind existence, or a meaning behind life and existence. And this is something that all of humanity, since the moment we figured out that we were human and could think for ourselves, we have been chasing that. And Namira, the darkness, is the gross reminder that it comes for us all, and it's going to no matter what.
Is it also a reflection?
I'm fun at parties.
Is it also a reflection of Anu's fears in that regard? Hearing you go through that, going through that, you go through Etard at Daedric the Dreamer, the idea of the introduction of not, because when you say something is and then is not, that emptiness becomes something that you instinctively go about, that is instinctively revolting because it's so antithetical to what you are, which is potentially why you get Namira associated with all the disgusting stuff, because that it's a way of giving existence to non-existence, personifying non-existence in some way. And one of the things that I'm sure we'll get to the Reachmen, but I want, in this sense, the Reachmen think about Namira positively because they think of it, of her as presiding over the cycle of kind of bringing life, death, and everything going around and around. And because they don't see that as a bad thing, Namira isn't a bad god, because some things can stop and then start again. Whereas if you think of death as a stop and the idea of non-existence at all as being threatening, then you immediately want to start dismissing it, making it into these little bug things that we can squash, we can deal with. The associations with death and decay are just belittling Namira, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, could be. Well, something that I was just thinking of that comes to mind when people talk about like the fear of decay and ickiness and such is that there in many cultures, overwhelming majority of them, there is honestly, especially in older centuries ago, a healthy, frankly, a wariness of death and dead people and so on. And one of the things that you can look at in a lot of earlier religions and a lot of modern religions that still retain some of their earlier practices is a lot of rules and guidelines for dealing with corpses, with dead bodies, with infected people, with old food, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the reasons why Buddhists originally found so much acceptance in other cultures was because Buddhists, in many ways, did not have these issues with dead bodies and so on. There were a lot of cases where other religions would actually utilize Buddhist priests to deal with the bodies of their dead because they didn't want to physically touch it, and the Buddhists had some sort of magic, where they were not afraid of being, of inviting evil spirits. It's one of the reasons why a lot of funeral rites seem so esoteric and strange and overly complicated. It's because that back then they used to make a lot of sense because people didn't understand how infection and decay worked. So one of the things that I think of when I'm thinking about Namira's worshippers having an interest or a fascination, or at least are just not affected by things like dead bodies and rotting and so on, is ancient Buddhists and the way that they sort of found usefulness in other cultures with from the knowledge that they had.
So I have I could talk about this for like days. I have two major points about Namira. The second one we'll talk about later. Chris, it's going to be about Jung. So people who are doing the crust,
no, I got you, baby. I got you.
But on what you were talking about, the fear of death, there is, of all things, there is a documentary called Metal: A Headbanger's Journey, done by a guy named Sam Dunn. He's a anthropologist, did work in Guatemalan refugees and whatnot, and he examines heavy metal culture from an anthropological perspective. And in the video, which you can find the whole thing on YouTube, it's in a single video. It's like an hour and a half long.
Absolutely, the link for the chat.
It's absolutely worth it. He talks about the heavy metal's fascination with death. And one of the guys he talks to, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I remember he's a Satanist. He says that before the 20th century, we had to engage with death every day. Whether, if you were a farmer, you may have killed an animal that you were then going to eat that night, right? They would, when people died, you didn't take them to the undertaker. They were in the house for a few days, and you would prepare the body for burial yourselves. We've put all of that onto other people now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are people who go through their whole lives and never see a dead body because they're always, it's somewhere else. It's at the funeral home, or it's
or it's a dead body, but it's been made up by a
to look living. Right?
To look alive.
That whole he looks like himself.
Yeah. Oh, he looks like he's still alive.
That's like the worst thing you could ever say.
He's sleeping.
Yeah, he looks like he's sleeping. He's not really dead. We can go home.
And so what this guy, and God, I wish I could remember his name, what he says is he thinks that's why so much of late 20th century horror is about death and about the spiritual, because we're afraid of it now. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to deal with death and the movement into spirit realms and all of that kind of stuff. absolutely fascinating. I highly recommend it.
Well, I mean, what was it before though?
What was horror before that?
Yeah.
I mean, like for example, like and some you did have some of that, like Bram Stoker, his Dracula. You know, there is that kind of fear of the dead, and
Frankenstein's monster.
But
Right.
the
Sure.
you get a lot of focus on sanity.
oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Look at
And I would assume
H.P.
reproduction
Lovecraft.
and sex and other taboo,
Yeah.
socially
So
taboo
like
things.
the concept of the new woman was kind of a focus, especially in the Victorian era.
Mm-hmm.
We get like the yellow wallpaper. We get things like Faulkner's a bit late.
But people turning into other things. I think werewolves.
Yeah.
Oh,
were,
yeah.
In
Jekyll
general-
and Hyde.
Yeah,
The what?
in general, the way that I would characterize what Michael's talking about in terms of pre-death obsessed
Yeah.
horror
Mhm.
is stuff that was unnatural or outside of,
Right.
especially
Yeah,
in Western
yeah.
Christian culture,
Okay.
outside of what should be God's law or God's domain. So
Mhm.
hybridized
sense.
creatures creating life from death.
Right.
Okay, so is that
Strange science like Jekyll and Hyde. The undercurrent behind so many of these is you mess with the natural order,
Yep.
and here's your comeuppance.
We dwelled
deal
in
with it.
God's
Yeah,
domain.
well, that's a whole theme about Victorian literature in general.
so? Is that basically that we've othered the natural order, and Namira is just an expression of that?
Could be.
Maybe.
Yeah.
M.R.
Well,
James
that's
Revenants.
something
No,
that I go ahead, Felix.
I would challenge that, because if we're thinking again, trying to look at it from the cultural frame of mind of the people of Tamriel, right, and how we see this window into their cultures and their worldviews in the games, death is ever present.
Mhm.
So that kind of cultural comparison from ours to theirs doesn't really work for me.
Yeah.
But what could work in the sense of making some kind of comparison historically would be to compare how, say, medieval Europe or China or India viewed death as just a thing that happened, and you can use that as a frame of reference. But to try and use a modern equivalency, it just doesn't really work, because the people of Tamriel, like just to use Skyrim as the most recent and obvious example, death is ever present, from assassins to dragons. Like, just like everybody knows someone who's dead, and they just leave the bodies in the street, and you can strip them naked and pose them around. The people are like, "Yep, that's normal, I guess."
Yeah.
Like,
But it's still written by modern people though. But
Yeah.
So,
I mean that's
So my first major point, to go back to the Khajiit. So going way back to the Khajiit cast, I talked about how elves and humans view the primal relationship between Anu and Padme as brothers in opposition, right? Mimetic doubles, going back to Gerard, yada, yada, yada. Okay. But the Khajiit don't see it that way. They see it as love. A wife and her husband and their children. Now,
Yeah,
here's
I was just about to say, like, when Khajiit mentioned love a lot, and from studying the 36 lessons and from having my ass all the way up in like thelemic theory, it twists my head around that I have to suddenly shove affection back into it again. It's just very
different.
weird.
Yeah, it's what the Khajiit call love is not what Vivek is calling love. But anyway, it's so for them the whole arc of the universe is love. Now, here's the trick. Because that love, that primal love, the love from which all other loves descend, went dark, and it became violent. And in fact, it became murderous. And this idea of the Khajiit as orphans, or you could even maybe say that whole subgradient of like the children of Anu and Fatime as orphans who are cast out of their home. You know, think about homes that have an abusive parent, and one of the other parents and the kids have to flee for their lives. That's what we're talking about, right? And they flee into the great darkness. And that's where Fatima gives birth to the last of her kids. Now, dear God, there is stuff to talk about there for months.
Mm-hmm.
And the last of them to be born or to come awake, we'll get to that, is Namira. And I think then that what Namira represents is the idea that all love ends in death. Because not long after Namira was born, Fatima died, and they were effectively orphans. Because ain't nobody going back to Anur. Nobody's going back to the abusive dad that killed mom. Not happening. So they're on their own. And that's what Namira embodies, is this idea of all love ends in death. So everything ends in me. Everything decays. Nothing lasts. There will be no happiness that endures forever. In the end, there's only me. And that's why she tortures people until all they know is her.
Mm-hmm.
It's
that's
nihilism.
It is.
Yeah.
It's kind of an ultimate nihilism, but also there might be some kind of narcissism in there too.
Yep.
One of the things Mac talks about is that Namira absolutely loathes herself because she's the end of anything good. And then that parallels in her absolute acceptance and love for her children or those who have become her. Which, oh boy.
Yeah. That's
go ahead, James.
I was gonna say that almost reminds me just a bit of the Beggar King story.
Oh, yeah.
Which is fantastic. It's just
it's really good.
it's the only I seem to kind of internalize that as an aspect of Namira as well, that she's kind of like Grandpa Nurgle. That the sense
Nurgle,
of,
I was going to make that comparison.
That you go to her for protection against the things that she can help you with, and she cares for you even as she gives you this stuff. She will care for you and look after you.
Right.
It is a very nerdly kind of concept. Yeah, it's a good point. Well, but is that any different than shit?
No, it's not different than shit.
Okay,
no, it's very much
is that any
shit.
different than Parrot?
Very much.
I saw an opportunity. I took it.
So
that's a good point.
If I can sort of steer this to a different perspective, like while keeping Michael and Chris's stuff in mind, I would like to pivot a bit, and I guess this is where we can finally start introducing the Reachmen.
Please.
James, you had touched on this earlier about how the Reachmen see her as part of the cycle of just their hard scrabble existence, and so she's seen as necessary to the functioning of life and the replenishment of the Reach in a certain extent. So she's not bad. And with the Briar Hearts and everything, you kind of have this like sort of undead zombie, but sort of more powerful to a certain extent. Like I know we talked about it a lot in the Reachmen cast, but there's some elements where other cultures will have a different view. So not to say that Michael isn't wrong. I think he's definitely right in terms of how a lot of cultures might view Namira. But I think that also as the Reachmen show, it's different in the sense of, well, it's necessary to the functioning of the universe. I would also, to a certain extent, like it's obviously not the same and not of the same importance, but it's a functionally similar idea to the Hindu Trimurti, which is the creator god, the maintainer god, and the destruction god. Because, well, like you got to create a world, and then you got this other guy who's going to maintain it for a while. But then, the world gets old. It needs some new ideas, some new blood. And so the destruction god needs to come and break it down. And then the cycle begins anew. And this is where actually the term Kalpa in Elder Scrolls comes from the Hindu concept of a Kalpa. They believe that there have been several Kalpas in existence already where the world has been destroyed and remade anew.
Which, I wonder if that whole thing feeds into that idea that Akatosh and Alduin are two different aspects of time, that the past and the future, respectively. But that's neither here nor there. That's
yeah, like you're clearly sort of getting the concept, right?
Yeah.
And like just if we sort of quickly look at other cultures around Tamriel, you can find where Namira is either not really talked about or she's very important. So for the Khajiit, she's an important figure. For the Reachmen, a very important figure. For the Nords, the Dunmer, the Bretons, the Imperials, not so much.
Yeah.
For the
She's not,
Redguards,
not even.
kind of, but it's
Mhm.
not like Namira specifically. It's the concept, which is still like her sphere, but it's the concept, right? So think about it. Oh, the skin ball, we're trapped. Everything began to die and decay, and Santak bit his own heart, and it was death. And oh God, this is just the worst. So they don't say Namira, but like she's there, and they
Yeah.
clearly don't like her, and they hate touching dead bodies again. To go back to Chris's earlier point about bodies developing different cultural practices and oh, don't touch it. So she's there, but she's not as important as say the main gods, especially all the ones with swords.
I'm
So like
wondering.
there's differences all over the place, and at the end of the day, some of the most fertile soil, or you see like I've seen like some people on Instagram, for example, like goth Instagram and stuff, post about this, usually tagging it with memento mori or something like that.
Yeah.
They will show, oh look, it's this
Mhm.
dead animal, but look at like this beautiful flower or this new tree that's
Right.
coming out like through its skull. So death has given way to new life, right? Even in our front yard, which no one's ever seen, but we have this massive lilac bush, and we planted it on top of our old cat when she passed away. Like we lifted out the very small plant. We buried our cat with like in a blanket, some of her favorite toys and some of her favorite treats. We buried her, piled dirt on, put this little new like lilac tree in front of it, and it's just so healthy and blooming. And a part of me knows that that's because it is literally feasted on the flesh of my former cat. Like that's just part of life and existence, but we don't like thinking about it. And yeah, I could feel the like tension in the air in chat when I said like technically this is what's happened.
Mhm.
And we don't
Well,
like to think about it, it's not romantic, it's not pleasant, it's weird.
Well, it feels
you-
weird,
you-
but
you-
it, you know.
You brought up the Briar Hearts a
Mhm.
little bit ago, and something I was thinking about. I mean, we know there's an obvious correlation between the whole Briar Heart ritual and Lorcon, taking out the heart and replacing it with
Yep.
this plant. But now I'm making a connection with Namira. Are they embracing Namira? They're trying to put Namira in their hearts because they're emulating Lorcaj, or at least how what Michael was saying earlier about Lorcaj stands there in the doorway, his heart has been removed, now there's a heart of darkness. If the Briar Heart, the plant itself, is supposed to be, because it's some kind of natural I mean it's like a seed or something, isn't it? Or a flower.
Yeah, it's like a blooming fruit from a tree.
It looks like an artichoke, honestly.
Yeah,
It does.
Does
really
it?
does.
But I wonder if that's part of some kind of ritual to bring them closer to that decay. Like I mean, I'm kind of thinking almost like a Dia de los Muertos kind of thing, celebrating the dead, and so they're almost a death cult in that way. But I haven't finished playing Markarth yet, and I know that they have some really interesting takes on the Daedra and the constellations and the firmament and the Aedra and everything. So I mean, I need to finish that so I can. I think I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna look through that lens, try to look for Namira stuff, and then I don't know, maybe I can follow up on Reddit or when this ends up on YouTube, I can just kind of put it there. But I don't know, that was something I was kind of thinking about, because I mean, we know the Reachmen, they use bones all the time for their decor. They'll use
Yeah, like
they
literal skulls and skins and stuff.
yeah, and then is it the Reachmen who like to take the heads of Spriggans and hang those up, or is that
I
just
feel
Hag
like,
Raven?
yeah,
Or
probably.
is it just
that's
Hag
the-
Ravens in general?
I think
I don't remember.
I'd
'Cause I
be
know-
inclined to think hag ravens just because
Yeah,
it's
yeah, and I
anti-E3.
know the Hag Ravens are usually somewhere sprinkled within the Reachmen, but I don't
Yeah.
think Hag Ravens by virtue are reach.
Yeah,
folk.
they have an agreement with the Reachmen or a pact with them
Yeah.
of sorts.
Well,
But
speaking of pacts and Reachmen, this is in sort of one of the notes or tabs really that I had open, and I had it all highlighted. So if I can just quote directly from the Reachmen UESB about Namira, the second paragraph in says Hircine and Namira's roles complement each other. While Reach folk dwell in the world of the living, Hircine is a guide that helps them navigate Nurin's hardships. Upon death, Namira acts as a psychopomp for Reachman souls that gives and takes lives until their spirits are enlightened. Thus, Namira is seen as the avatar of primal dualisms, such as beginnings and ends, which stem from her world of spirit.
there we go.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
and yeah, this also ties into again, I think we talked about it in I think either the Hircine cast or like the Reachman cast or something, where the Reachman Hircine is their god, but there's also like 5 different aspects of Hircine, which are technically, if you sort of read between the lines, different Daedra. And also it's seen by the Reachman that sometime after Hircine took the mantle of like Lorkhan's creation of Nirn, he became the sovereign of Nirn, like a king. And then of the second world of Nirn, which is the realm of flesh, because that's where like your body and your soul and where you can create new worlds can ultimately stem from. And this brings me to the point that I've actually been wanting to make for the entire cast, but I can't just ask it right at the gate. What is Namira's influence in terms of the godhead and mental decay?
I love it.
There we go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
This is what I've been wanting to ask like the past hour.
Okay.
Okay. Here, I got one. I got a hot take. Deteriorating mental state, which leads to madness, which is why Sheogorath and Namira can be linked to Lorkhan.
Okay.
Hey,
That's a good one.
That.
Somebody mentioned the sense of otherness earlier. That Namira is dealing with aspects of life that a lot of people, at least in modern Western culture, object to on a creepy sort of like level, which is a I mean we've talked about, for example, the uncanny valley before, right? Of something that's almost human but just not quite enough, and because of that very slight perceptible difference, it becomes really icky and awful, and nobody likes it. That sense of otherness is a psychological reaction. It's a real thing. And it's not it's not as culturally dependent as you might think it is. It is actually based a lot in the emotional responses that we built up over millennia of evolution, when we were learning how to identify and flee from mental disorders, insanity, just generally speaking, very upset animals.
Technique.
Yeah, infection, exactly. It's a survival technique. Being able to identify a fellow monkey who's diseased can help you avoid the disease and not get sick. Telltale signs of, nose bleeds or pallor or rotting flesh or whatever. These are all like indications of maybe I should not go near that one. And this sort of like spinal cord reaction to otherness is part of the reason why we now have behavior that we would call xenophobic. It's a lot of why it has to do with the same basic reactions that people have when they are first encountering people of color or white people or whatever. It's, you know,
people of a different religion.
Yeah, exactly, of a different religion. Knowing that somebody is from a tribe that is other than yours is scary. And it's part of that fear reaction. It's one of the reasons why David Cronenberg makes such great movies, because body horror is fucking terrifying. Rotting flesh, no second date. Exactly. Yeah, right, Baka. Red flag. So one of the things that I like about Namira is that she addresses that very primal instinct, and that her domain is, you know, has to do with the things that set off those alarms. At first, it seems like Namira is another one of those Daedric princes that's a little bit too specific and a little bit too, you know, narrow for my own personal tastes, and I keep driving this point home. But in fact, the reality of the fact is that she's not. She represents a very important part of the cycle of life and death, as Felix pointed out, of rotting and decay and the transfer of a physical body into of a coalesced physical body into an uncoalesced food state, I guess you could call it. And then and she also represents a very a sort of a primal fear of things that are gross, and every culture has those. Every human being has that reaction. It's just part of who we are. So I think she's actually got a great sphere. What does she represent as far as the Anu and Padme reaction? It's what's great about Namira's idiom is that sense of revulsion against something that is unlike us is something that is a trait of both Padme and Anu. That you don't have to be chaotic to hate the thing that isn't yourself, and you don't have to be Anuic to hate the thing that is part of yourself. It's something that both have, and at the same time, it's something that, and if we haven't mentioned it already, it's something that Jung deals a lot with in a lot of his books. The idea of getting, and it's something that Buddhists talk a lot about for the process of self-awareness. It's the idea of becoming aware of the fact that we can dislike a lot of things in people, but the things that we hate the most immediately and the most ferociously are usually the things that we hate about ourselves.
Yes.
And so the reaction that people need to have when the whole idea of self-awareness preaches the idea that you have to understand what it is that you find dissatisfactory about yourself, that you hate in yourself, and that once you get good with the fact that you hate yourself and you understand why you hate yourself, it becomes very obvious when you have an angry reaction to something that somebody else does, if you can just stop for a second and think, oh, I've made that mistake before and I hate myself for making that mistake. And then it suddenly makes a lot more sense. Then it becomes less about that guy voted for the wrong person, fuck that dude. It becomes more about, I remember when I voted for the wrong person, or, and I felt like an idiot, or I'm constantly worried that I'm going to vote for the wrong person,
Yes.
So that's my answer for that.
Yeah.
About the decay of the godhead and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it would have been really cool if Namira had played more of a role in the transition of a Kalpa. Because one of the principles of the transition of a Kalpa is the idea of the mundus, of the corpus body of the universe, decaying and transitioning back into rebirth again.
Well, again, because I'm a Redguard stan, that's kind of covered.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it doesn't mention in the monomyth specifically, but I mean, if you just look at Daedra and their spheres, that's her jam. Sep creates the skin ball out of old dead worlds, old skins, right? The remnants, the literal husks of old Kalpas. And he balls them up and says, yeah, no, this is how you get to heaven. You can trust me. I'm a shady used car salesman. And then the spirits get there, and then they realize, wait, no, I'm mortal now. No. And
Slaps
this
top
more
of
relevant
Mundus. You can
form-
fit so many souls in this baby.
Preach.
And the
That
hipster like,
meme
really?
is going to be on the internet by the end of this stream.
Well, I'm not the one who's gonna make it.
Neither am I. Ain't nobody got time for that. But like that is clearly a part of the sphere. And if you also want to think of Yokuda as the sunken continent, the memory of the before time,
Mhm.
it's bloated, it's down there, it's decaying, it's gone, but like not entirely forgotten, but it's not useful anymore. It's no longer a living, breathing place. It's a mark upon the world. That's about it. And I'm wondering now if maybe with that whole, bloating and death and stuff, Andrew might have some Sload related Namira things to talk about. He's nodding, so I look forward to hearing this.
I was going before I do that. There were some things that that 8-Butt has slapped into chat, which is possibly speaking a bit to Namira's role in creation and such. It's saying it's. I don't know quite where this is quoting from, but it's according to Reach Myths, Lork convinced the Spirit Queen Namira to grant him a place in the infinite void where he could create, and Shatter's moved on.
To create a realm for wayward
reading
spirits.
Create a realm for wayward spirits.
That's probably from Markarth.
Yeah, which
just I haven't fucking played it yet. Okay.
but that perspective, and it kind of harks back to what Felix is saying about Namira creating space for everything to happen. But that's a role for other cultures, at least, that's traditionally held by Kain or Kinnereth. So, where do we put? Is Namira Lorkhan's spurned wife rather than child, or are we going? How do we conceptualize that? Just the link between Kain and Kinnereth and Namira is just something's gone click, and I can't work out quite what.
Yeah.
I have heresy. I'll come back to it.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if mine counts as heresy or not, but just in terms of like how, and like to clarify, this is how I think you're trying to get the point across of that Kinnereth and usually RK are associated with death and the transfer of souls, right? It's the metaphysical aspect.
Yeah.
Namira is the physical aspect.
Okay.
The physical decay of God in terms of Satakal, the serpent who bites his own heart, dies, sheds his skin, and begins the world anew. It's the skin ball. It's the beginnings of mortality, and like, I am decay. Your immortality decays before you into mortality. But the metaphysical or the spiritual aspects are still under the charge of those within whose spirit is. Namira is more physical. In fact, I would say for a Daedra, she is incredibly tied in with the physical aspects of Nirn and its functioning. Like, Ifre be damned, she's another important part of this that goes unrecognized.
Yeah.
Well, the Khajiit say that Namira corrupted Ifre, and that's why.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's why on Nirn things decay.
Yeah, because she's not quite a proper Daedra in that case.
And I can't remember. It's in one of
very few are.
It's in one of Amon-Dro's books, and because let's see if I remember this correctly. Nirni and Ifre were married. Is that right? No, or was it Khenarthi? Who was his wife? Whoever he was married to, Hircine was also loved her, but she chose Ifre, whoever it was. Yeah. And Ifre was corrupted by Namira, and he killed his wife, and which may explain why Hircine is so angry at Ifre, and maybe is trying to turn the Bosmer into reflections of him. I don't know, but that's another subject. Yeah, it's in one of the Amon-Dro books. I don't remember which one, but yeah, it's crazy good
it's
stuff.
It's a reenactment of
It is.
the original enantiomorph.
Yes.
But anyway.
Yes.
I,
But
I think. Oh,
what I wanted to talk about, this is my second point, and then hopefully I'll shut up. This goes back to what Chris was saying about the godhead and that Felix asked about. So I talked before about this idea that all love ends in death. So let's see here. All right. So when we talk about being creative, the process of being creative requires a mental journey into a place where you can make unusual connections. And Jung calls this the descent into the unconscious. And you could think of this as a descent into primordial chaos. We envision it as the oceans, memory, etc. This descent into things where logic is less important than images, right? So when Fatime and her children flee from Anur, they go into the great darkness, which is the unconscious. Interesting that this is also what the dreamer does, because the dreamer flees into their unconscious to sort through, we're talking about Anu and Padme here, that to sort through the dark aspects of himself, that being Padme, Anu goes and sleeps in the sun and tries to dream a solution in the unconscious. So the Khajiit go, or I should say Fatime and her kids go into the great darkness, where they try to create a solution. And whether or not the unconscious necessarily reflects back their pain and the loss of love, we could argue about that. What's really interesting to me is what Omnisci says. Let me pull it up here real quick. And I quoted earlier about the heart of Lorcaj is filled with the great darkness, the unconscious. And when he was born, the great darkness knew its name, and it was a Namira. Now, Jung talks about, I'm going to try and pull this together, and Chris, if I fail, I'm going to need your help, but I think I can pull this together. Jung talks about that there are two major aspects of the psyche. That there is the persona, that's your public face, that's your idealized self, who you want people to think you are, and there's the shadow, which is all the stuff that you deny about yourself. Okay? So, Anu, or
we
Anor,
literally did that in Oblivion.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's all in there. So, Anor and Fatime, we're a happy family. All is good. Oh God. That's the repressed stuff. And as Chris was talking about earlier, the longer you repress those darker aspects of yourself, it will start to force its way out violently. And you'll be going along, and somebody says something like, "Oh, I don't know, I like Trump," and you completely flip out, right? You go completely out there, or either way, I like Biden, and it's like, I didn't deserve that, bro. What's going on? It's because it's not you, it's them. It's that inner darkness that they haven't dealt with bursting out. Okay, so they go then down into the subconscious to try to figure out, how can we create a world other than the one we've known? And what awakens is Namira. And this idea of the shadow becoming awake or awakening. What's the quote? One does not achieve enlightenment through drawing pictures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Namira is the darkness, the shadow becoming conscious, and recognizing all of the dark and horrible things that are inside, and bringing them up into the conscious mind, out of the unconscious, out of that place of metaphors and images and no logic, and bringing it into the mind so that it can be dealt with.
I'm wondering then if that makes Namira a pretty decent metaphor for, like, in terms of like repressed emotions and stuff, as you were talking about. I wonder if that makes her a good metaphor for guilt and shame.
And thank you, because my buddy Mac from the lore community, that most of you I think know Mac, his thing is that God, I wish he was here, that some of what's going on there is that she takes all of that guilt into herself. that instead, even though the darkness has become awakened in Namira, she doesn't process it. She just says, I am the darkness. All love ends in death. All love ends in me. And it's like even though the darkness has been awakened, it doesn't. Jung says that the persona and the shadow have to come together and join hands and say, okay, this is who I am. I have to make peace with the fact that I have these good things that I want to do, but by God, there's these horrible things in me. And it's in reconciling those two aspects of yourself that you become whole. And Namira can't do that.
Yeah,
She's
like,
stuck still in the awareness of the darkness.
Yeah, it's kind of like an introspection thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to face the bad aspects of yourself, such as
Right.
violent outbursts, addiction, jealousy, envy,
Yes.
struggling with self-love, self-hatred.
Yeah. 7 deadly sins, yada yada. Yeah.
But just as a general question then, is that sort of self-reflection possible for any Daedra? Like, my immediate gut feeling is no, because they don't interact.
Lavicus Vile. And Barbus.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, only because he needed someone to get the better of, and that's how we get Barbus.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
But, yeah.
Oh. That was okay. This one may be off on the side, but this is something I wanted to submit to all of you to get your thoughts. And it's a question of ontology. So Namira is considered a Daedra, but unlike all the other gods, or Daedric, Adada, whatever, she wasn't born from Anur and Padme. She came to be some other way. Does that suggest then that Daedra or the creatures of the Arbus can have differing ontologies, that not all of it comes strictly from Anu and Sithis?
Sure.
I think once again it just goes back to a point that MK said a long ass time ago, which was quit mixing up your gods and demons.
Yeah.
Because
but it's fun.
Yeah, but I mean, like, to really sort of try and unpack this a bit and where you're sort of going with this stuff. We talked about this in the Meridia cast, how Meridia is not like your typical Daedra. And now we're talking about it here in Namira. Namira is not your typical Daedra. Sher Gorath, in his own way, is not your typical Daedra, nor is Malakath. Like, there
is no typical Daedra.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no set framework. The duality, there's no black and white. It is all a gray maybe.
I mean, it's
how it is.
It's did they participate in the creation of Mundus? Yes or no?
That's
no.
In that sense, no. Although I could make an argument for the Redguards, yes, kind of.
What is creation, though?
Yeah, that's it. That's actually, James got a good point. It's very hard to determine objectively what Aedra or Daedra or entities of any kind or whatever were involved in the creation of Mundus, because nobody really knows how Mundus was formed.
I was actually going for another angle for that one, because creation isn't, particularly if we're going to go with Namira as decay and rebirth and so on, is an ongoing thing anyway. The instant that the Daedra create a champion or an artifact or interact with the world in some way, they have recreated Mundus because of how it will have to then how it will react with everything else and then carry on going forward. So the Daedra were saying, no, we didn't want anything to do with this at convention, maybe, but now they're very definitely involved. So there is no clean dividing line between Aedra and Daedra anymore. Possibly.
It's all just fucking spirits, man. Fuck existence.
It's politics. It's pure politics for going back to the Oldma, as far as I'm concerned.
I do think probably the definition for Aedra would be those who gave gift limbs for the creation of Mundus.
And that's because none of the Daedra gave gift limbs, but their spheres are very much present in Mundus.
Yes.
After convention. So I should have specified convention.
Yeah.
Wheels within wheels.
Which is where we can get back to a Sload quote, because Andrew still hasn't talked about Sload, and I know he wants to. But because Nagasta actually says that, do you not think that the Daedra inspired the very qualities that they're associated with? So if that's remotely true, then the Daedra have to be involved with Mundus and entwined with Mundus.
And I mean, since we're talking about Sload now.
Yes, absolutely.
Do it,
Go on.
please.
Yeah. So I mean, I should preface by saying, I mean, this is all just my own interpretations, my own headcanons, and my own writing. Because I mean, this stuff just hadn't been filled in, so I wanted to kind of fill in the gaps. If you go and you read the Sload creation myth that I wrote, Thras and his kin, the Sload, are visited by 4 Daedra, who then offer their gifts, their knowledge to the Sload. And so one of them is the Rot Mistress, Namira, and she intrudes on Periite's sphere to teach the Sload, how to be gross and how to weave virus magic and spread disease and that kind of thing. I mean, that's where we get the Thracian plague from. And so when Nagasta says that, are you gonna give him a pancake? My wife said give the dog a pancake.
Give the dog a pancake.
That
Come
is
on.
the best non sequitur ever.
Yeah, that was amazing.
That needs to be a meme.
Clip that.
When Nagasta says, "Are you going to give him a pancake?"
Yes.
That's the best.
There he is.
Oh, that's gonna be. Oh, it's a
Easily
meme.
the best part of this stream. Hands fucking
It's-
down.
My wife crept in holding a pancake in her hand. She had this look on her face. Anyway, when Gasta says that many of the things that the Sload are known for were inspired by the Daedra, that's one of the.
No, because I'm sorry, and I really hate to interrupt you, but I'm just imagining that. It's like, and so she did intrude upon the spear of the white Guar, manifesting her own spear, and offered it to Barbas.
And it was a pancake.
And it took the form of a pancake, and Barbas did say,
Took the
"Am I a
form
good
of the
boy?"
moon and Lorcan, and he ate it and knew his aspect,
Or Drew.
and did make a change, and then extruded Malakath
God.
upon the bed sheet afterward.
We hope not. Oh,
My
God.
friends are writing religious texts about your pancake now. She says that sounds dirty.
Yeah.
In the name of the Guar, the Pupper, and the Holy
Oh,
Pancake.
God, that's wonderful. Oh, I'm in tears. That's so wonderful. I'm sorry. Please continue, Andy.
Yeah, I'm sorry to
got so far
interrupt.
off
Please
the rails.
continue. I just had to get that out of my mind.
Yeah.
So
We're-
anyway,
we're-
Sload.
We
We're in
have
an
a single
Airbnb,
hammer, and everything looks like a nail. That's right, Baka. We only got one hammer.
There you go. Good boy.
And that hammer is Volendron.
Yeah.
Yeah. So also he has
Wielded
grossest
by the
parts,
god who is excrement. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. So there wasn't really a whole lot more to that. I had written that the should we add wife interruption
Chat,
to
get
the
someone who looks at you the way Andrew's wife looks at him.
Yeah.
yeah. So tell us, what do you think about Namira?
Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
That's,
There you have it.
There you are.
Yeah. So there wasn't a whole lot more to add about Namira. I mean, she taught them how to be gross, and
Mhm.
and Thras said, "Well, you're not getting anything in return. That's ours now, bitch. Peace." And so, and that's
No
what
takesies,
they did to all the Daedra. Yeah. They did the same thing to Molag Bal and Malakath, and quit your whining. And who was the other one? Oh,
Nocturnal?
it was Kafka's Vile. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Molag Bal, I called him Ruddy Ball. Malakath, I called him the Ald Key, and Klavka's Vile was the Horned Child. And that's
Although,
and then Namira is the Rot Mistress.
although that kind of reminds me that if we're talking about Daedra that get screwed over by mortals, Nocturnal is the best example of that, I think. But not to kind of go too far into Nocturnal, because we need to keep some stuff for the Nocturnal cast. But where's well, you can look out my window if you like. It's night already. But we've got Namira as the spirit Daedra and Nocturnal as the Erdra. They strike me as very, very similar concepts. Are we just looking at different cultures that will place one of those as the primal thing, or is there something that we can determine about how those two relate?
You know what? I'm going to say this. I think we might want to wait for a different cast for that, like Nocturnals.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, I do. I have some heresy about Nocturnal and Namira that I'd love to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've covered so much stuff already, and also I'm feeling really bad because I was supposed to feed my dogs an hour and a half ago.
Oh dear.
And they're kind of looking at me.
Well, unless there's anything we need to cover, like just a quick summation of like Namira's symbols, any like artifacts.
I did want to point out, kind of jumping back to Reachmen and Khajiit, if the Reachmen were Khajiit, they'd all be Dramathra, I think.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So which makes me want to write a story about like some Reachman who was actually a Khajiit Dramathra, and he's just living among the Reachmen. And they're like, yeah, he's one of us.
Yeah, sure. All right. I like his views.
Yeah. That'd be cool.
All right.
Do it up, man.
Well, is that who we're doing next? Is Namira? Is Nocturnal? Yes, Nocturnal is next.
Nocturnal.
Fantastic.
Yes, so that's
I'm coming.
Beautiful sequitur.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I want to thank everybody for showing up. Join the Discord if you haven't already. Don't forget to email selectiveslorecast@gmail.com.
Yes.
Or is it the selectiveslorecast@gmail.com?
It's just Selectives
Selectives Lorecast. If you have any questions at all that you want us to cover, email us, let us know, get in contact with us, because we are always looking for new content. And after we run out of Daedra, so
hey, I still have my ideas. You keep forgetting about them.
Okay.
We haven't done Finaster. We haven't done like some of the other.
That's actually a very good point.
Did we do? Did we? We already did Aedra, didn't we?
Yeah, we did Aedra. Remember, the Maracast was like awesome. So thanks everybody for showing up, and we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.